Sorry, stole your spot in.
I think you moved to the table.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to stand for a bit. Let's sit down. All right. Well, I think everyone's back. One thing I realized as I was coming down here is that somewhere in the COVID not having meetings, I've lost my clicker, so I'm going to have to stand near the computer. But when Kristen and Alan and I met this summer, they asked for this first meeting to be an overview of our special education programs at San Jose Unified. So what types of programs are offered, where they are location-wise, and in the course of doing so, we'll cover a few other topics. We could certainly chat a little bit about independent studies as well, since that's new this year. I included a slide about that. This picture I also noticed this morning, there's one of the students has like a sticker on his back, which is, I think the student in front probably did that, that's why he's looking down. I thought that was pretty
well, I don't know. Sometimes if you get a student that removes their sticker all the time, you put it on their back where they can't reach it.
Yeah. I like to think it was a prank. Okay. So,
now we know how you were as a child.
Leave it as a prank.
yeah.
Okay.
Before we jump into our programs, I just wanted to ground us in our vision, which as a district, our vision is to prepare today's students to be the thinkers, leaders, and creators of tomorrow. And we do that in a lot of ways for our students, and we do that in even more ways for our students with disabilities. One of which is the way in which we decide to administer programs and which programs to have, and how to align those programs. All of our strategy around the programs that we offer and where they are is all related to supporting our students in achieving this vision. We've made some changes over the past couple of years that I'll touch on to better do that, and we're always also seeing how we can use our program structure to better support this vision. There's a lot of things that we want to do moving forward, and I'll mention some of those as well. But I wanted to just take some time to ground us in this. And the second thing that I wanted to ground us in is the concept of a free and appropriate public education, which is commonly called FAPE. And so FAPE is generally, I won't read this here, but the obligation that we have as a school district to provide students with disabilities access to a free and appropriate public education, meaning we are doing everything that is needed to support that student in accessing their education, just as their non-disabled peers might be able to do so. And so the way that we align our programs and the structures that we have in place for our programs are all designed as well to ensure that we're providing each and every student with FAPE. And so while I'm going to talk about programs in general, for each student, they obviously have an individual IEP, which is somewhat redundant, but an individual IEP, which, while in the same program as other students, looks different. Their accommodations are different. The amount of time that they spend in that program is individualized. The amount of related services, like Diana provides, are individualized. And so I just wanted to note that because these programs are not monolithic. There's a lot of differentiation that goes on within the programs themselves and for the individual students based on their needs. But we're going to focus, I'm going to talk a lot just about the programs as a structure and give some general information about them, but I did want you to know that it's not as if every student who's in that particular program receives the same education. It's actually, that's not the case at all. Every single student receives a very individualized education, but they are with students who have similar needs so that they can be best supported. And the last thing is I wanted to just talk about FAPE in a way that's a little more accessible maybe, and the way in which we often present to our new teachers and other staff as to how we get to the services that a student receives. We don't just create the services out of thin air. What we do is we first assess a student's present levels, including the input of the parents. And the way we do that is for input from the parents, input from the staff, input from the teachers that work with them, also through standardized assessments that are given by our school psychologists, our speech language pathologists, our occupational therapists, etc., to determine if a student is eligible or not under IDEA for special education services. If they are, that present level data also helps us define all of the student's areas of needs. We're bound to define all of the areas of need that that particular student has, areas of need that are defined by the laws that govern special education. We then take those areas of need and devise goals for a student for each of those areas of need, sometimes multiple goals depending on the severity of the need for a student. So for example, a student might have a need in articulation, but it might be more than one area of articulation, so they may have two goals within that to address. And then once we know sort of where the student is, what their needs are, what goals we have associated with those needs, that's when the team determines what services are required for the student to meet their goals. So for example, if you are a student whose area of need is articulation, and you have goals related to that, we wouldn't provide occupational therapy services because that's not addressing the goal. That's not going to help you achieve that goal. Rather, we would do speech and language services, and it may be 25 minutes a week, that's the SLP who's the expert recommends, or it might be 150 minutes every 2 weeks because the SLP who's the expert recommends that that's what's needed for that student to meet their goal. And those change every year with the annual IEP or in amendment meetings as new data is made available, as students respond to what's happening in the classroom. But that is how we get to the programs that we offer to our students and the services that they receive. So I'm going to pause there for any questions. Probably review for some of you. I think it's important before we talk about programs in general. Great. All right. So when we think about programs, I like to use this diagram of an upside-down pyramid to show and to demonstrate the concept of both the continuum of services, but also the concept of least restrictive environment. So many of you know, who have been in special education, that one of the tenets of IDEA is that we are, the law that governs special education, is that we want to serve students in the least restrictive environment as possible, meaning they're spending as little time as possible outside of the general education setting. And so ideally, the pyramid here corresponds to the number of students that are in each of those placements. I'll start at the top, which is students who are in general education without an IEP. So students who do not have an identified disability or were found to have not qualified for special education. That's the top group. And then going down from that is providing students with IEP support in class. So a resource teacher pushing in. And I'm going to use the term RSP for the resource program support, and what that generally means is teachers who do not have a classroom that students come to and stay for the whole day, but rather they are itinerant teachers, specialists who push into general education classrooms and pull students out of general education classrooms in small groups.
So, can I just say that speech language pathologists and OT work with general ed students?
Yep.
They are not at that point considered disability, special ed. So special ed actually starts with the resource program. I know this is, you're going, what? But
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying.
Special ed services actually start with RSP. So, and I like my parents who are only getting my services and they're in general ed or preschool or whatever, they're in their program. They're in
Correct.
internet.
Correct.
So
Yes.
special ed actually starts with research.
Yes, semantically. But
Semantic.
students who do not receive supports from a teacher still qualify for IEPs under speech
Right.
and language.
I mean, we have an
Yeah.
IEP,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I get what you're saying now.
Okay.
So, and then that's actually a good segue into the right-hand side here, which is the other supports that are provided both in class but also throughout the continuum are all of our related services. And I'll talk about what those are on the next page. The next level down is pull-out services, where a student is pulled out of class, or a general education class, for their services. So that could be a small group working with a special education teacher. That could be a small group working with a speech language pathologist. That could be individual counseling that the student comes out of the class for 30 minutes a week or something like that. And then the last bottom piece there are students in what we call special day classes, or SDC. And these are classes where the student might go to spend all or part of their day in, depending on their area of need. And within special day classes, we broadly have three types here at San Jose Unified that you'll hear me reference when we go through the programs at individual schools. The first is called a non-categorical program. which is a program for students who primarily have a specific learning disability or an other health impairment. And it is a mild to moderate special day class that students might spend, like I said, all or part of their day in there with mainstreaming opportunities depending on that particular student's IEP. We have special day classes specific to students with autism, and so those are geared around the needs of students with autism, and again, that could be all or part of their day, depending on that particular student. And then we have special day classes that are for our more moderate to severe students, students who may go on to earn a certificate of completion, and again, all or part of the day, depending on that particular student's needs. And then beyond the programs that we offer here on our campuses, which as a big district, we're very fortunate to be able to offer a broad range, a broad continuum of services. There are other placement options for students who have needs greater than we are able to serve at our school, either because it's highly specialized, for example, a student who might be medically fragile. We do not have the volume of students to be able to have our own medically fragile program with the right nursing and health staff, and so we would place them in a program run by the Santa Clara County Office of Education where they can have students from across the county in the class to make it something that is that they can have all the right specialized personnel. And then there are also non-public schools in the area that are schools that specialize in a particular area. There are non-public schools for students with autism. There are therapeutic non-public schools that, again, through the IEP process, students may be placed there after being in previous parts of the pyramid and the team determining that that is the appropriate placement for them.
Are we tracing data on the students that we are putting in non-public schools, like the reason they've had to make that transition, if it's been behavioral or if it's their disability, and just seeing if there's a growing trend in any of those areas, how the district might want to retool to address and maybe have that service then brought in-house?
Yes, that's a great question. So yes, one great example of that is we'll talk about the San Jose Unified Autism Centers at Terrell and Canoas, and then this year there's also a class at Lowell Middle School. But that program is a highly specialized program for students with moderate to severe, who are moderately to severely impacted by their autism. That was directly born out of the district seeing that they were utilizing non-public schools for students who had those needs, and that we could, with the right design, provide those services in-house. And so started, I'm not sure how many years ago now, but it's at preschool and elementary school, and we did a review of data the past few years and saw that some of those students who went from the elementary school to middle school did end up going to non-public schools, and we thought that with the right supports in middle school, we could keep them here in San Jose Unified, and so we are piloting a program this year in the middle school that we hope will show us the results that we want to see. But yes, we're always looking at that.
And then are you looking to grow that program into Lowell High School if you're starting them off at the middle school there?
I think that at least right now the theory is, and we'll assess as we have data and as it goes, is that by high school, the programs that we currently have actually can meet the needs of those students without too much structural changes. But that first year, especially out of elementary school, we need to offer a smoother transition for them into the middle school environment. Okay. So it's possible, but that's the working theory right now. Because we always do want to have an eye towards the least restrictive environment that I mentioned. And so as we talk about students who are in the lower parts of the pyramid, the goal is always, and their IEP is always designed to move them back up the pyramid, so to speak, or have as much of their time as possible spent in a general education setting.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. So I appreciate that the goal is to always have them in a less restrictive environment. I felt fortunate that my son, coming out of a non-public school, fell into a special day class where the teacher was very focused on that. I don't see that universally with other special ed teachers. So what are we doing with professional development to foster that? Do what you can to get them into more of the general education setting, because this teacher went out of her way during every break with the rest of the staff in the break room. What do you teach? how do you feel about having kids with special needs in your class? And really finding the teachers that were like okay and ready to differentiate their class style to meet and work with these kids and help include them.
Yeah.
And I thought that was exceptional. I was so sorry when she left the district. But I would love to see focus on getting our staff to look at how do we help our students be more inclusive by middle and high school, because it seems like they get more isolative, and that's not what I would like to see for our students.
Yeah, definitely. So a couple of things on that. The first is that a lot of the work is around mindset. And so we are doing that in a couple of different facets. Most notably, what we saw from our data is that when students moved from 5th grade to 6th grade, the teams, often with very good intentions, thought that they needed to further protect students because of the change from a single teacher to multiple teachers in sort of the middle school life. And so what we did this past spring that we're going to build upon this year as well, it's actually one of our strategic initiatives for our elementary schools, is we have the transition IEPs, you may have heard that term, so
Yes.
for students who are going from preschool to TK or kindergarten, 5th to 6th, 8th to 9th, high school to post-secondary if applicable. We actually laid out a much more rigorous set of expectations as it comes to the placement for students moving from 5th to 6th grade. And then also from preschool to kindergarten or to TK. And we asked our case managers to really interrogate whether or not the student needed a more restrictive placement. And we provided a lot of education on how a student might be supported in a general education setting with the needs that they have, how they might be supported just in a less restrictive way in general. For example, some students who are in elementary school special day class, the non-categorical that I referenced, so the mild to moderate, we saw that students were just being placed from elementary school potentially into a full day in middle school of the special day class. When we really looked at it, we asked our case managers to think about, do they really just need to be there for ELA, for English Language Arts? Because they only have goals for English Language Arts. And you only think they need it for English Language Arts. They should be in general education math, general education social studies, an elective, all these things. And then we did the same with preschool to kindergarten, which is a little harder because there is no sort of gen ed preschool. And so they have to really think about how students will adapt to sort of a comprehensive school site when they've been in this preschool setting that's only special education at this point. But in both cases, we really stressed least restrictive environment. And there's a lot of things behind that training, a lot of mindset work of just, we're not taking the student to the program, we're bringing the program that the student needs to the student. And so, so that was our big focus last year with it. And we're going to continue that and also move it from 8th grade into high school as well. That's one thing. The other thing is some structural things as well. For example, the collective bargaining agreement that governs how our teachers teach is definitely a factor in how we can set up our special education programs. And so we have a lot of ideas about how that might be changed to just facilitate what I think everyone wants, which is what you shared.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
All right. So,
Can I just ask, so what I'm understanding about these transition IEPs, that would entail having some middle school representation at that IEP?
it
For
could.
a 5th to 6th, is that happening? Because
It could. It gets really
It
tricky
should.
at the end of the year. Yeah. But that is one of the reasons we have our program specialist team who are
Okay.
knowledgeable about multiple programs at multiple schools and multiple grade levels. And so they often serve as that expert. And then when we are able to line up schedules, we definitely have, we always have someone there who's knowledgeable about the next school year's programming and can explain and answer questions that come up about what does this look like in middle school?
So my argument for staff from that site being there is they know the teachers at that school site. You said that you have the project manager there. They don't always know all the staff, so I just want to be sure that that's on your radar? The preference, I understand it's difficult to do because so many meetings happen in the spring, you're taking care of your own, you don't need to double the load. But I just want it on your radar.
Yeah, one other thing that we did that the pandemic it just eliminated the ability to do it, that I'm hopeful we can do this year, is we planned some release days for our teachers, especially those in like programs, so that elementary school and middle school teachers would have a chance to meet in January to discuss and share what their programs look like, the profile of the students that have been successful there, what mainstreaming opportunities look like, and I'm talking a little bit more about our special ed class teachers. So we had it all set up last year. The pandemic didn't let it happen, but hopefully we'll do it this year too, which I think will facilitate some conversations and some understanding that may have not existed before.
That sounds really fruitful.
So when I was in middle school, Burnett, now along to San Jose State, or San Jose High.
Yeah.
San Jose High came, there was a meeting in the cafeteria, they talked to them about classes, did electives, so the students were comfortable going in.
Good,
So
that's wonderful.
it's been happening
In some pockets.
in some pockets.
Yeah.
So just want you to know that.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay, yeah, let's go to the next slide then. So I talked about these related services here, which can be provided anywhere from in-class to other parts of the pyramid, anywhere that students need it. But some of those related services, I just added the definition from IDEA, are speech and language services, occupational therapy, adaptive physical education, educationally related mental health services, which is generally known as counseling, deaf and hard of hearing services, specialized vision services, and a host of others that are provided anywhere across that continuum that we saw.
What is educationally related mental health services? What's the difference between that and just mental health services?
No difference really. Yeah, we call it that a little bit to distinguish it from school counseling, just to make sure people are clear, because students with IEPs can access the school counselor who's there without it being on their IEP. Maybe their pet dies or parents are going through a divorce or something like that. But then there's some students who, because of their disability or their areas of need, require specific services on their IEP. Yeah, so we just try to use that term to not confuse people. But roughly, it's the same thing as mental health services. Yeah. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to jump into our programs, where they are, the types of programs that they are, and share the staffing ratios that we have for them. To talk through it, but I did want to chat about the independent studies questions, because that's definitely been a big part of my life in the past 10 days, or 14 days, or 21 days, I'm not even sure at this point. So it was referenced that the state did pass a law this summer, AB 130, that requires school districts to offer independent studies. And so for students with IEPs, this is where something the state passes collides with a federal law, that is IDEA, where there's not a lot of clear guidelines, and so we're all left, Leo, the SELP director, sort of steering the ship on how to operationalize this as a school district operating under these different regulations. And so what it amounts to is roughly students with IEPs, to be placed in independent studies, it has to be an IEP team decision. And the reason it does is that the district and the IEP team, or the parents who comprise the IEP team, need to all be in agreement that we can provide FAPE to a student in the independent studies setting. So independent studies is very similar to, or the way we think about it in this context is very similar to a program at another school or a type of program. We have to evaluate if it's going to be appropriate for the student given their areas of need, because we are still bound, regardless of what the state says, to provide a free and appropriate public education to our students. And so what this looks like is myself and my team holding IEPs with all the parents that requested independent studies for this school year, to discuss their individual students' needs and services and what they require to be provided FAPE. and then making a decision if independent studies is appropriate or not, and if so, making an offer of FAPE to them on their IEP for independent studies with related services delivered virtually, or not, in determining that independent studies is not appropriate and is not able to provide FAPE to students in that setting. And so I think largely it's been relatively smooth with parents who it is offered as part of the IEP. Obviously, that works for them, and the related services and all of what's provided on their IEPs remains unchanged in those cases, and we provide those services virtually at independent studies. And then also just conversations and meetings with families who the team feels it's not appropriate for them, and working through it with them, and seeing what compromises can be reached. But that is an option right now that has not existed before in our continuum of services for K through 8th graders, or I'm sorry, K through 5th graders. There was, prior to the pandemic, an alternative education program that many people refer to as independent studies, but was different for secondary students, that involved actually meeting with a teacher in person once a week, both the general education teacher and a special education teacher. That will remain after the pandemic too, and that's very separate. That's part of the IEP. Parents don't apply for it. But the new program that we have as a result of AB 130 is what I was referring to.
Are you talking about the medical?
No, at Learning Options, there's always been an alternative. We call it an alternative education, but a lot of people, I think, colloquially call it independent studies. There has been an option that is different than the independent studies that is being offered as part of this law.
Because the once a week meet with a teacher, I thought that was part of the home study program, which was not the Liberty.
No, this is different than that. Yeah. All right. Any other questions about independent study? All right. Excellent.
Can I say good luck?
You need to say that too.
I mean,
Mary Ann, see, because she's.
you're in a tough boat.
Yeah, I think I actually, like I said, have been working on it pretty much nonstop the past 3 weeks, and as of this afternoon, there's just one family that I can't get a hold of no matter how much I call them or email them, but everyone else is situated, and still some IEP meetings to be held, but at least situated,
Just
understand where we are.
we used to send the nurse and the counselor to those people.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Just,
Yep, yep,
you know.
definitely. Okay, so I'm gonna just go through then our programs, starting kind of the order of starting with the way students age, I guess the way all of us age, from preschool through our high school and post-secondary options. So there's going to be a lot of information on here. So I'm going to orient you to this slide structure because it's going to be very similar for the rest of the slides. So this is about our preschool special education programs or our early education programs. And on the bullet points, you have the schools where these programs are. If there's more than one, there's a plus sign, and then the acronyms that I've used is AUT for autism-specific programming, NC for our non-categorical programming, Mod Severe for our moderate to severe programming, and then inclusion program is our full inclusion preschool programs. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the staff-to-student ratio excluding the teacher. And that is just sort of the baseline staffing ratio that that class has. It will vary, it will increase based on student needs within that class, but that's just sort of the baseline number of adults that are in those programs to support students. And again, it varies based on need, but that is the minimum that is part of the program. Sorry.
How come Trail's not up there?
Yeah.
That's the next slide.
Okay.
Yes, 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 yes. Good question.
This
Yes,
is
I have a
special
separate
education
slide for our
preschool.
autism center program. So one thing to just highlight here from, well, I guess two things from last year. You know what? I'm using an outdated slide deck. Can you just download the right one? I just looked at that and realized that I downloaded the wrong version on this laptop. Give me just 1 second. Just a couple of program moves from when we last did this presentation that I want to highlight on here.
So the preschool programs, are they only students in San Jose Unified, or are they using some brought in from around the county?
Yes, so, all right, I think I got the right one. Sorry about that. We did this presentation 2 years ago. I don't know if you remember, but I had taken, when I just searched in our little repository, I just grabbed the wrong one. Yeah, preschool is interesting because, as I mentioned, there is no general education preschool per se. We offer, as a district, what is called state preschool, which is early education programs funded by the state that is only offered to students who meet specific criteria, mainly related to income thresholds, but there's a few other things that I don't remember exactly at the moment. So it's not open to every single student, and it's offered at only a select schools based on formula that the county uses around zip code and income levels that I'm not entirely sure how it works, but that is the state preschool side of things. We operate special education preschool programs, which by law we have to provide to any student who qualifies for such a program, ages 3 to 5. And so it is only open to students who are residents of our district, just like our other special education programs, TK through 22. Yes, so to answer your question, just students who are, I think the state preschool, but I'm not entirely sure. I do think that students who do not live in our boundaries can potentially attend those programs, but I'm not entirely sure how that works. Yeah, and so the 2 things to highlight here. One is there was a preschool program at Gardner that we've moved to Galarza, and that is was for a couple of reasons, but mainly so that we had sites with 2 programs so that we could provide more specialized staff who could serve both of the programs. And then we opened our 3rd full inclusion preschool program at Lowell Elementary School. So last year we opened our 2nd one at Allen at Steinbeck, 3rd at Lowell, and we are hopeful to continue to grow that to where that is the only type of program that we offer at early education. However, the fact that there's no universal general education preschool definitely makes that difficult because it limits the number of programs where there are students without disabilities that we can co-locate with our special education programs. So it would severely restrict where we're able to offer it geographically, but we're going to work through that and hopefully find some creative ways with the county to get around those barriers.
Are you working with Kathy Wall's team on that?
Yeah. It's more around how that zip code formula they do, and they actually tell you where you can locate the programs, the state preschool program. So we're seeing if there's some flexibility with like geography. Like, yes, we'll meet that criteria, but can we put it here versus where you told us to put it? So we shall see. Then we move to our services that we offer at all schools. So all of the schools in our district offer speech and language services, offer resource support services, so that's that RSP service that I talked about, and all of them offer all of the other related services that we do. So if you're a student who needs deaf and hard of hearing services, we offer that at every school. If you're a student who needs adaptive physical education, we can offer that at every school. So all of those services and the RSP programs are offered at every school. We'll mention here that there is program space that we have to consider. There's a number of students, a maximum number of students that our teachers can serve based on the type of program, based on the contract that we have between the district and the San Jose Teachers Association. So there are situations where, very unfortunately, Students who enroll quite late may be placed at a school that's not their neighborhood school, even though they only receive RSP services because the program is full. We don't do that for any other related services. For example, we don't limit the number of students who receive speech and language services at a school. But because of the way teachers work and the difficulty of having just like a teacher come one day a week versus be there all 5 days, for some of our there are some instances where students who are in an RSP program may be placed at a school that is not their neighborhood school, but only in extenuating circumstances. We then have, well, I'll take this time to say, we're going to start talking about our specialized programs in the K through 22 space, and one thing we've done over the past few years is by helping for our students to achieve that vision that I talked about is we saw that it's really important for our students to be able to start in kindergarten or 6th grade or 9th grade if they're in a specialized program and finish at the same school. There were instances in the past where a program might only go grades K through 2 and then the students would have had to switch schools halfway through. We also wanted to ensure that in the spirit of the least restrictive environment, is students who did require a specialized program, that to the extent that we possibly could, the elementary school, middle school, and high school programs aligned with how their general education peers may matriculate. So they would have the same experience to the extent possible that students who were not in the specialized program would go through. So case in point, our autism resource program used to be scattered around the district. We've now aligned it all at the Willow Glen School, so a student who may require that program from kindergarten through the time that they graduate would matriculate along with a lot of their peers from Willow Glen Elementary to Willow Glen Middle to Willow Glen High School. So the Autism Resource Program is a lot how it sounds. It is very similar to the resource support program that we offer in the sense that students are in the general education setting the majority of the day, but it is specific for students with autism and provides a lot of social pragmatic support, a lower staff-to-student ratio, as you can see, than our typical resource programs, and also more behavioral support than our typical resource programs. Moving on to specialized programs, more specialized programs. This is your question about Terrell Elementary. So another specialized program that we have that I touched on with Kristen's question is our Citizen Unified Autism Center. And so this is, as you can see from the staffing ratios, a very high adult-to-student staffing ratio at both preschool and then Canoas K through 5. And I talked about you don't see Willow Glen Middle School on here because it is a pilot that we haven't solidified yet. We have a class there that follows the same principles of instruction that Terrell and Canoas do, which is unique to those programs. It has a higher staff-to-student ratio than the other middle school programs that we operate. Like I said, this was born out of the district doing a review of students that were attending non-public schools and seeing that we felt we could provide a specialized program on our campuses that served more of the students in a less restrictive environment so they could stay at Citizen Unified instead of having to go to a non-public school. The tenets of it are based on actually a model that was pioneered by a non-public school in this area called the Morgan Autism Center. And they worked with us as a partner for quite a long time until we were able to take it over fully. That has a lot of different principles to it, but focuses again on that very high adult-to-student ratio. All right. So moving along with our specialized programs, another specialized program that we offer at just a few schools is our Therapeutic Special Day Class program for students who have areas of need in social emotional health and other areas related to that, often behavioral. So we have the program at an elementary school, middle school, and then 2 high schools, so Reed, Tessalero, Leland, and Lincoln. And what is unique about this program is there is a counselor, a full-time counselor, who is tied to and embedded in the program with